Hey, everybody.
Thanks for tuning in to the Hanging On to Hope podcast.
I'm Brenda J.
And I'm Karen Wonder.
And we are HangingOnToHope.org.
This podcast is intended as educational and is not psychological or medical advice. Always consult a professional when needed, and we disclaim any liability in connection with the instruction, information, or advice given.
Hi, everyone. We just wanted to let you know that Lynn will be holding an Instagram Live with her daughters on Saturday, November 18th at 3 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Her Instagram link is at SunshineZ24. That's SONSHINEZ 24. And we hope to see you there. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Hanging On to Hope podcast. This is Brenda J. Today we have Lynn Smith on the podcast. Lynn is an abuse survivor and the author of I Just Wanted to Be a Wife, My Successful Disasters. She's also part of the Inspire Her Squad, which is all about women inspiring women. Karen and I have both attended Coffee and Conversations here in Arizona, and Hanging On to Hope was just a sponsor for Inspiring Her's Coffee and Conversations Goes Pink breast cancer event. The event helped raise money for our Nicole Wilkins, who has just finished chemo and radiation. So welcome to the show, Lynn.
Thank you.
Yeah, hi, Lynn. It's Karen. It's so nice to talk to you again. Thanks for coming on the show. Can you start by just telling our listeners what led you to write this book?
Well, I used to have a daycare, a home daycare. And I partnered with somebody and we were going to go large. And she was sick. And I just felt that we couldn't do it and it wasn't the direction. And so then she said that, I don't want us to be a successful disaster. And I thought, yeah, like my marriages. I just thought that. And then the Holy Spirit gave me the title and each chapter. And before I did a lot of, I call it unraveling. Some people call it deconstructing, but I like to call it unraveling. Mm-hmm. And I started unraveling and I had scriptures to go with each chapter. But then I found out, no, they don't fit. You're doing what you used to do, just putting scriptures that are completely out of context and has nothing to do with it. So I had to remove all the scriptures from the chapters. And this happened as I was writing the book, as I was changing. And so I didn't understand why God wanted me to put all my business in the street, this portion of my business. And why couldn't we have done this when I was in my 40s? And he just dealt with me that people 51 and older need to know they can start over too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. It's an age where, it's important. Yeah. It's very important. I totally agree with that. In the preface of the book, you say, raised in the church, I honestly felt like I had two choices, to get married or be hellbound for having sex. This is what made you want to become a wife so badly. Can you elaborate on that?
And that's what I was thinking when I first read this question. I thought, wow, I bought into, my parents raised us in the church. They were really hardcore. And I really felt like they offered us Jesus and not really anything else. And they meant well. This is another part of the unraveling I had to accept. Like when I say they didn't offer anything else, like options to go to college, just different stuff. Like you didn't have to get married. And I really did love God. And I felt so condemned when I would have premarital sex. So in my mind, you can't do both. And I did want to get married anyway. I liked my parents' story, but because I didn't want to sin and go to hell, I just kept getting married. And that is one of the reasons why, instead of just waiting and asking God to forgive me and just write it out, no, I had to get married because I felt so condemned.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what we were talking about at the beginning in Gretchen Baskerville's book, that she talks about women that just continually get married because they just exactly what you said. They feel like they're going to hell or they need to get married. So they just get married over and over and over again and then end up in unsuccessful marriages.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so you say in your book, after one failed marriage, I kept going until becoming a wife became so important that it became my idol. I wasn't sure who I was if I was not a wife. Somehow I became a completely different person. My only goal was to conform to my husband's desires in order to be the perfect wife. This led me down a journey of abuse, infidelity, and eventually back to my first true love. This is my journey of how God rescued me from myself. And next you talk about how your church upbringing and the thoughts that you were supposed to marry young, kind of like what you were saying. Did you want to expound any more on that and how that led you to your very first marriage?
Yeah, I would say as I was writing this chapter, I didn't realize what an influence my parents had on me as well. Because my dad, they weren't together for 6 months. And my dad moved from Milwaukee to California to really, he says, to kidnap his only son. But, we didn't mean nothing, Dad. But he came back because he loved my mom. And he eventually changed. And I thought, God, what an amazing love that you came all the way from another state and you changed your whole life. You became a Christian. And I like that. I wanted to be loved like that too. And they always would say it's better to marry than to burn with desire. And if you're saying that this is the life you're living, you're saying it out loud, you're living it out loud in church and in the community, then the expectation is, well, you're dating, when you going to get married? Because then here we go back again with you must be having sex, so then the condemnation comes again. And our church was very legalism.
Yeah.
Very.
Yeah.
Legalism always brings that condemnation too.
Yes. Yeah. And it makes you stay longer and stuff that you should have walked away.
Yeah.
Oh, good.
Totally did for me.
Oh my.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Sure does. So yeah, do you want to talk about your first marriage? A little bit of that story?
We'll talk a little bit about that. I mean, he's the only one because I have all 3 of my daughters are with him. I gave him his 2 chapters. I emailed it to him because his daughters asked me to. Now, I don't know if he read it or not. Told him I wasn't changing anything. It was really hard because I just didn't have a good understanding. I thought because we all went to church together, which we grew up together in church. He was a little older, but I knew his mom since I was a little girl. I mean, we grew up together, his siblings. And I thought that meant relationship. And it did not, but that's what I thought. And so I thought he'd understand that I didn't wear pants and, all the legal stuff that we did that he heard our bishop say. I thought he would understand. And honestly, I had no idea about being with a drug addict. I was raised in a church. We were very secluded. We didn't do it. And so he was very street smart. I had no idea what I was getting into. I went from my parents' house to our apartment.
How old were you when you got married the first time?
I was 19.
Oh, wow. That is young.
And did he tell you he was on drugs at the beginning, or was he a secret drug addict and you found out later?
He said marijuana. So it didn't seem like marijuana was bad. He did not say crack cocaine.
Okay.
And my father tried to tell me because when he went over, when he was in the army, when he was younger, he had those issues. So he could recognize the issues, but I just thought he was being mean and he didn't want me to be happy.
So then how did that marriage come to an end? The first one?
Man, he cheated after being married for so long, going through all that stuff. He finally got to a rehab, got clean, and it was really pretty consistent. And we moved to another part of California by Palmdale, Indio, Palm Springs, out in that area. And I was just devastated. I just was thinking that there is no way that I went through 7 years of that. And this is how it ends. And then when I asked him, but do you still love me? He didn't know. And I packed up the girls and we left. But this particular relationship was so hard because I believed a lot of stuff that he said. And it was so abusive, sometimes physically, and a lot very much emotionally and mentally. Like he would say over and over, how can you be so smart and yet you're so dumb? And I really, y'all have seen me. I'm not really heavy, but I don't have a flat stomach. And so, he would just berate me just constantly about that. And it really tore down my self-esteem. I isolated because I was so embarrassed that he would get up and say he was clean and then he wasn't, then he'd be missing. And then our pastor would say, but if you really love her, you'll change. And he never changed. So did it mean he really didn't love me, or did it mean that you can't change because you love me? See, I had to unravel all that stuff because that just wasn't true. you know?
Right.
And when the girls were little, they didn't understand I could hide so much stuff. And, you know, he is my third chapter because I married him again. And God tried to warn me that if you get back with him, everything you would have established with the girls, it's going to kill you and it'll be ruined. I don't know why I didn't believe. I was so down after chapter 2.
Well, if he was that abusive, I mean, there's the trauma bonding and
yeah,
the different
absolutely.
things that could have came into play
Yeah.
are not real love, are not godly
Yeah.
relationships that are abuse
I
driven.
don't know. I felt this
Narcissistic.
obligation, like I just should have stuck with him. You know, and here's another thing that I didn't realize until, gosh, maybe a year ago. We're not responsible for people's free will. Like not even my kids.
No.
It says nothing about me if they don't choose God. They have free will. I was like, oh my God.
God is not controlling. Yeah. Abuse is controlling people. That's abusive.
Right.
God is not abusive. He's not
No.
controlling, and he gives us free will to show us that he's not.
Right.
That's how we know it's wrong, because God is love.
Yeah, that's why love, when you're being controlled, you don't feel love because, nobody wants to be controlled.
Yeah.
And God isn't controlling.
Yeah, he's not. And that's what I love.
And I wish I had those thoughts when that I have now, because man, that would have helped.
Yeah.
It would have helped.
We get wiser as we get older.
Yes, we do.
Yeah, because God is love. He shows us that through. Yeah, I love that. So I love it. I really like this in your book too, because it really makes you think, and I like books like that. So you want people to learn from what you did in your life and what you feel like they could avoid, and that's education, and that's what we do. We help educate and help people heal from abuse. So I love at the end of each chapter, you have discussion questions that make people think about the mistakes you made and try to apply them to their life so that they don't repeat past patterns. And so for chapter 1, for example, I didn't write the whole question down, but you talk about feeling pressured, clear warning signs, blind spots and red flags, or feeling if it is our duty to save, fix, or change the person, and also the benefits of not marrying young and waiting. And then number 5, it's how the church's teachings impact your self-worth and it being tied to marriage, and better equipping the church and young people to not necessarily having to marry young.
Yeah.
It's like they instill that in young people. They just need to get married. So that's the 5th thing that you put on there.
Okay.
So can you briefly expound on each of those 5 points that you want people to learn something from?
So number 1, the pressure was internal, that conflict and I'm going to tell you why, because I knew God as a punisher. I did not, because I was so disobedient. I didn't think I deserved his love. I didn't think I deserved to ask him for help. So that caused me to isolate, and I felt this inner conflict because I was going against the word of God instead of, now I know him, that he loves me. And so no matter how many times I would have had premarital sex, he still would have been there for me. So I did that to myself. And the clear warnings and blind spots and red flags. How about the first marriage? One of his friends, I didn't even know this person, came to my job and said, "Hey, are you Lynn Smith?" I said, "Yes." "Are you about to marry so-and-so?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "I want you to know he does crack cocaine. He's addicted to drugs." I didn't know this person from nowhere. You know what I said? I can save him. I'm like, "Thank you for letting me know." And that goes right into number 3, thinking that I died on the cross for somebody's sin and I can save this man.
Yeah.
And I couldn't. And you guys, I remember, when we were living in the apartment and going through, the Holy Spirit said, "You're doing more than I do." I don't even do all this stuff. But it didn't click. It didn't. Sometimes I would say, "Why would God tell me this stuff?" And he knew it wasn't going to click. And so I'm so busy trying to save somebody's soul. I needed help. I couldn't even save myself.
Yeah.
While I was trying to save and fix somebody else. So I was constantly drawn to people, men who had potential, who needed to be fixed. And somehow my love was greater than Jesus's love. And I'm going to help you out of all your stuff.
That reminds me of just what Bob Ham's message is the dynamics of abuse, that, as empathetic people, then, we want to help. And an abuser doesn't want to own any responsibility. They want you to carry it. So
Yes,
it's just
I
this
listened to that
dynamic.
one. That was good.
Yeah, I love it how it's explained so well. It sounds like that was kind of the dynamic with you too.
Yeah, I think
Yes,
number
it
3
was.
is really important for our listeners to just, I think as abuse victims, we've all been at that point where we thought we could save or fix that other person.
Yeah.
I think I would just hide it all and make him sound like he was a saint and just hide everything he was doing. People were like, man, this guy's great. Like nobody knew he was as horrible as he was.
Yeah,
Because I was so good at that. And
yeah,
why was I doing that? Because it
Yeah.
said something in the Bible about the Proverbs, is it 31? 31 woman lifts up
Yes.
her husband and esteems him. And I read that and took it way too seriously.
way too serious.
Yeah.
Yes.
We're not supposed to protect abusers.
Right. You don't enable
No,
it.
we're not.
Yeah.
We're
We're
not.
not supposed to have anything to do with them, actually.
Right. Enabling them is not loving them.
Yeah. So
No,
you can
it's not.
continue on. Sorry, we're blabbering. Go ahead.
No. And the benefits of not marrying young and waiting, because I didn't, 19, as my psychologist daughter says, my brain was still developing.
Yes.
It really wasn't, because when I turned 26, I'm like, girl, what are you doing? And he wasn't growing and I was. And so, and even though we dated a year, I didn't really get to know him because I didn't know he was addicted to drugs like that. I just saw what I wanted to see and my brain wasn't fully developed. I'm sticking with that. And we just need,
Yeah.
man, I should have done more things for myself, but I just wasn't interested. And then the church's teaching impacts self-worth and being tied to marriage. Here's what my kids said to me. And I apologize because I did to them what my mom and them did to me. They said, this is what we knew about the church and sex. Don't get pregnant. They said, what did my daughter say? Don't have sex, don't get pregnant, and you're going to hell. I said, I'm sure we said a little bit more than my youngest daughter's like, nope. And so she said, why didn't y'all tell us? Well, why don't we want to have sex? And they didn't. Why should we wait? Why is it so important to do that? And so what I'm happy about is that my grandchildren, they will know the why, because God loves you and you love your body.
Right.
Because you're worth it. So they have a better way to tell them, because we want them to feel good about themselves. You don't give it away because it's yours and it's important and because you're loved.
Exactly.
We want you to love yourself too.
Yeah.
So
Respecting yourself.
exactly.
Yes. I absolutely agree. Having a high value.
Yeah. So then after all you went through with your first husband, you continued on your path looking for another husband just months after your first divorce was final. You say, was I healed? Absolutely not. So what happens next in your story?
So with this one, because their first husband was so mean and he had issues keeping a job, probably because he was addicted to drugs. So I thought in my mind that if I had somebody a little older, which meant maybe more responsible and nice, and this next person, when I tell you, it's like the enemy said, I got you, boo. I'm going to send just what you need. Everything you said, I'm going to send that. He was older. He had a really good job. I didn't even have to work. He had a great job and he was so nice, just everything. Now, here's what I wasn't paying attention to. Why didn't I meet your children till after we were married? Why are you checking on this little girl when her mom told you not to? See, red flags. And I just didn't, he's so nice. That's nice that you're checking on her. You know, even though something inside me was like, that's really stupid. Why? Who does that?
You got married again and the second husband was with like spending a lot of time with a younger girl. Who was the girl?
Or he was just driving around checking on her, but she didn't know.
Who was she?
His ex-girlfriend's daughter.
Okay. So pretty young then.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And so, I mean, it's like I really didn't tell people. I didn't really tell my parents. We just kind of like eloped in my sister's house. And because him and my brother-in-law worked together. So that kind of made me feel like, okay, that it's not too bad. But to hear my daughters, they locked themselves in the bathroom and they were just crying. They didn't want this. And I didn't listen to them. And so, of course, the outcome of this chapter, Karen and Brenda, was so hard to write because this is where my daughter got molested. And every time I would go back, I'm tearing up now. Every time I would go back and do edits, I just had to walk away. It was so hard to have to face myself and tell myself, you were selfish. Because even with us, I confronted him. As soon as she told me, I believed her. I told my parents, because we were living with my parents, because my brother had passed away and my parents needed help. And we confronted him, and I told him, you pack your stuff and you leave. The same day my daughter told me. The social workers came because they want to make sure that he really left the house, and she couldn't believe that he was gone. I'm like, absolutely. And I had insomnia for 8 months. I was so shaken, and I lost my confidence of being a mom.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how I ended up back with their dad, because I knew he loved his children. He wouldn't do that, but you love them too. You know what I mean? They didn't deserve this horrible mom that you did this. And it was so hard to forgive myself. It took years. She forgave the daughter that it happened to, forgave me before I forgave myself.
Yeah, it's hard to forgive.
And I talked to her best friend back when we lived in California, and I thanked her friend because her friend told her, I know your mom. If you tell your mom, she's going to believe you. And and I gave her a hug and I said, thank you for doing that.
Yeah.
You know, she knew my character. And so she told my daughter to tell me, and she did. And I was supportive. We got therapy and everything. And then here comes their dad. They don't need to talk to nobody. When I tell you my daughters were so mad, one of them ran away. The middle daughter ran away when we were about to move to Vegas. And the marriage didn't last 2 years because I didn't even change my name.
So this was when you got back with your first husband?
Yes.
Not the second one ended abruptly because he did that to your.
Well, we were together for 4 years, and once it came out, we were done.
Then it ended. Okay.
Yes, it ended right away.
So then this was the next question. So you got back together with your first husband, and how and why did you convince yourself to do that? You kind of did go over that already. Mm-hmm. And what would you like our listeners to learn from this?
I should have got help. Church wasn't there for me. I felt so alone. And at that point, I was sitting in my church dying, sitting in my church bound, a place that should have been able to heal me, just be there for me, love me through this. They did not. My parents were absolutely there for me. They didn't want me to move. I just would tell the listeners to get help. And I know it's hard when you isolate, because I did it at that point, but it is so important because I wasn't the only one hurting. My kids were too.
Yeah.
And I could have salvaged it because the counseling was working. I would have came out of it. I just lost all confidence in my parenting.
Right. And then you felt so bad about what happened. Then you thought that you knew their dad would never hurt them, but then he convinced you to move away from everyone and isolate, which is a move of an abuser's isolation.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. So that made it really hard.
It did.
Yeah.
It made it really hard because now I went to Las Vegas. I didn't know anybody out here, at the time.
Mm-hmm.
But I actually grew up, but because my parents were very enabling, bless their soul. They just
having time away from them.
Yes.
Yeah.
And even though it was so hard, the abuse with their dad got worse, and it was so hard. I grew up and I learned to stand on my own 2 feet without my parents. So what happened when I got back with their dad the second time, he was really angry. It was not even about love at all. He was very angry with me. I was angry. And this one only lasted 2 years. It got so out of hand that he went to the kids' school, checked them out, and said, I'm going to kill your mom.
Wow.
Absolutely. I had a restraining order. He would threaten me, and then we just end up leaving because you can't. I don't know why anybody thinks that you can be separated and still living in the same house together. It never worked for me. Mm-hmm. So I had to get the kids. I didn't know anybody. So, in the apartment we were moving to was not ready. And so for 3 weeks, I was separated from my children. I have never in their whole life. We were never separated from each other. And then he was threatening me so bad that the place where I was staying, it made her so anxious that I had to leave. And I ended up going with my middle daughter. I would say that was the hardest thing for me, being separated from my children.
That has to be devastating. So then after that, you divorced again and found yourself in another relationship, but this time it was different. You said he was nice and supportive, but also an atheist. And you had
Yeah,
become,
and at this point, I walked away from God. I was in a backslidden condition, and I walked away for like 7 years.
Mm.
So boy, if somebody would have told me, girl, you're gonna walk away from God, I would have had them on the altar, like praying for them. But I did. I walked away, and I could feel God calling me back. My oldest daughter, she gave her life to God, and it sounded really good. So I called myself, I'm just going to check it out and make sure she's in a healthy church. And I did like the church. And they had a class where you can join. I didn't want to join because I was still living with him. I needed to get that part right.
Mm.
And so I was bargaining with God. If you save him too, I'll come. And God's like, no, I need you to come without him. You need to do this. And so it ended up, it wasn't for us to be together because I didn't believe people were really atheists, and he really was. And he didn't think I was going to ever go back to God. And I always knew that I would go back. I did know that. And so that I found myself there trying to rebuild my life again.
So you didn't marry that guy?
No, I did not. He
okay,
didn't.
so God
Because
wooed
he
you
wasn't
back.
going to go to church. You know, that was one of my important things.
Mhm.
If we was going to be married, we both had to go to church now. Come
Yeah.
on, Cameron and Brenda.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, after this, you did a 60-day fast and took a 1-year detox from men, but it didn't last long.
It did not last long.
Can you explain what happened and why you felt the need to get married again?
Yes. So, and this is where I learned that you can do all of that, fasting and praying and all of that. You still got to be in a personal relationship. I didn't know it at the time. I know now because I was just doing works. I was doing the things that I thought would help me, because when I got through detoxing and all of that, somebody gave me a word from God and said that the next person you marry, you're going to know them. So I made sure that the word came to pass, that it was true. So I was looking, once again, looking for people that I knew. Did you love God? And it doesn't even always be adding up, because the person that the last husband, I called him and wished him happy birthday. He wasn't in the church. He wasn't none of that. He came after. So once again, here I am seeing potential. You're so nice. And we were good friends before, but nothing changed. All of his stuff was still the same. The reason why I broke up with him before, still the same. So what are we doing?
Yeah.
What were we doing? And so I told myself that no matter what happens, I'm going to make it work. Divorce is not an option, which he said the same thing. Clearly, we weren't on the same page.
Yeah.
So there are 5 things that you struggled with in your life, and many of us have struggled with this as abuse victims. Number 1, your inability to think about how your decisions were impacting your loved ones, which you talked about a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Number 2, you made unwise choices. Number 3, your kids begged you not to do something. And number 4, your abuser controlled you. Number 5, and you had a hard time letting go. Is there anything you want to add to each of those so our listeners can have some hope through those words and some encouragement?
Absolutely.
To be continued. Stay tuned for next week's part 2. You don't want to miss it.
Thanks for tuning in to Hanging On to Hope. Check out our website, hangingontohope.org. There are resources on there, and if you would like to donate or volunteer, you can do that through our website. We are a brand new nonprofit, so we appreciate any and all support. And we thank you for listening, and until next time, keep hanging on to hope. We are evidence that there is hope and healing for you, and our passion is to help you find it too. So thanks for tuning in.
Thanks for listening, everyone.